Exposing a screen is one of the essential steps of the screen printing process. The phrase burning a screen has become a popular way to describe the exposure of an emulsion-coated screen to a light source. So throughout this section, you will hear both terms being used to describe the same process. You can burn a screen from many light sources, including the sun. The best light sources are those high in ultraviolet light. For our example, to expose a screen, we're going to use a homemade exposure unit. Many printers start off by building their own exposure unit, and we thought it would be best to cover that rather than the operation of a commercial unit, which will have its own set of instructions when you make the purchase of it. When using a homemade exposure unit, it's important that you warm up the lamp prior to exposing your screens. For most light sources, a 10-minute warm-up of the bulb is sufficient. All that means is turn the light source on and leave it run for 10 minutes or so, and you know you're getting optimum light output. The next step is to clean the glass. It's a good idea to clean the glass before any exposing session, the purpose of which is to remove any specks or dust from the glass, as these will expose onto your screen and create pinholes. The next step is to tape down the film positive. Be sure to use removable tape, as regular tape will make the removal of the film from the glass more difficult and will leave tape adhesive residue on the glass, which is difficult to get off. The next step is to place your emulsion-coated screen on top of the glass to cover the film positive. Depending on what you're printing, and for the sake of this discussion, let's assume you want the image to be positioned in the middle of the screen. So you will line your screen up accordingly. Now, there's a few special materials that you're going to need if you're using a homemade exposure unit, one of which is a dark piece of cloth, which will be 2/3 larger all around than the screen you're burning. You want to get a piece of cloth from a fabric supply store that is opaque, no light will pass through it, and soft felt material works very well for this purpose. Just make sure it's opaque. And the next step requires that you do a little arts and crafts work beforehand, but is very easy. Find a large size cardboard box of the heaviest gauge of cardboard that you can find. Cut out a piece of cardboard that just fits inside the screen just loosely enough that you can move it around. Using this piece of cardboard, and by the way, a thin piece of plywood or a large metal cookie sheet will also work well, place it over top of the dark cloth snugly inside the screen. Push the cardboard down around the edges to make sure that you have good contact with the screen. Finally, take a heavy object, a full gallon of ink works very well, and place it on top of the cardboard. The idea here is to have the screen as close as possible to the film positive on the glass for a good tight contact. The application of weight inside the screen accomplishes that. Just so you'll know, commercially made units, exposure units, use a vacuum pump and a vacuum blanket system that draws down tightly against the glass. This type of system will be discussed later. You're now ready to burn a screen. Now here's the slightly tricky part. Since you've never burned any screens with this new exposure unit that you've built, and you may never burned a screen at all, you really don't have an ideal exposure time established for your particular setup. Not to worry. Take a look at the specification sheet provided by the emulsion manufacturer. Typically, the manufacturer will include exposure times for various light sources. This will be a good starting point for you. The worst that can happen is that the screen will be underexposed, which will result in a stencil that will be slightly less durable, or will be overexposed, and the stencil will then be hard to wash out. A useful tool to purchase is an exposure calculator. This is essentially a pre-printed film positive that can aid you in determining the optimum exposure time for your particular setup. They're inexpensive and available from any screen printing supply vendor. For this section, we're going to use an exposure time of 5.5 minutes. This would not be uncommon with fluorescent lights and using a photo emulsion. Now, using a cookie timer, either analog or digital, set a countdown for 5.5 minutes and let the light source begin exposing the image on the screen. While you're waiting for the time to count down, walk over to your washout sink and set the hot and cold faucets to a tepid temperature. You don't want to use cold water only, as it will make the washing out difficult, and you don't want the water to be too hot or even too warm, as this could cause the emulsion to wash right off the screen. So it's important that you get it tepid to a good hand feel of just warm. Once your timer goes off at the 5.5 minutes, place the exposed screen in the washout unit and spray both sides generously with water. You should immediately start to see a faint white image of your artwork appear on the screen. Leave the screen alone for about 20 to 30 seconds and then spray with some more water. Your white image should become more apparent. Within a minute and a half, you will start to see the emulsion start to wash away as you spray. Continue spraying until the stenciled area is completely white and your artwork is completely visible. Congratulations, you've just burned your first screen. The final step is to use newspaper and blot out all of the water from both sides of the screen, top and bottom. Place the screen on your drying rack and let it dry for at least several hours, ideally overnight. Here's a tip that will help you with the screen making process. Buy a garden hose nozzle that has adjustable spray patterns. These nozzles are available in the garden supply center of any home building store or hardware store, and attach one to the hose in your washout sink. When you apply the initial water to your screen right after exposure, use the gentle setting. When you reach the point where you're doing your final washout, select the flat setting. The flat setting sprays the water with more pressure, and this will help you wash the remaining emulsion away much more easier. The flat setting also works well for washing out fine line art and images containing half-tone dots. The last thing we're going to discuss in this section is ganging images on a screen. A way to save from having to burn a separate screen for every image is to gang images on the same screen. There will be times when you may not have enough screens to print all of your jobs, and ganging multiple images on the same screen is a solution to this problem. Ganging images is very easy, particularly for printing left chest images and other images that do not take up the entire working area of the screen. Just place the images in the desired print position on the glass and expose the screen. As you become more experienced with ganging images, you'll find that you can place as many as 3 print jobs on one screen. Just flip the screen around and you're ready to go.